We will get started for tonight. So my name is Alex Carr and I work in the Lake County Communications Division. We would like to thank you for joining our open burning and landscape disposal informational meeting. This meeting is being recorded and will be added to our website after it's completed. I am joined tonight by Eric Wagner, Director of Lake County Planning, Building and Development, Krista Brown, Planning and Zoning Manager, Walter Willis, Executive Director of the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, and Ruth Ann Hall, Lake County Purchasing Agent. Tonight, we are going to provide an update on Lake County's efforts to explore alternatives to the open burning of landscape waste in the unincorporated areas. This includes identifying viable alternative landscape disposal options. We will also answer frequently asked questions from our public survey, which was submitted by more than 1,000 people. Thank you for that. We will likely have a couple minutes at the end to answer a few questions submitted through the Zoom registration and from the chat. You're welcome to type in questions throughout the presentation, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the night. Please know that the purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide you the latest information, but we do want to emphasize that there will be multiple opportunities for you to provide input. Our group of panelists will explain that in more detail tonight. That will conclude this introduction. I will kick it over to Eric Wagner to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Wagner. I'm the Director of the Lake County Planning, Building and Development Department. It's very nice to be here this evening with you all to talk about the topics on our agenda that Alex just covered. So although we're here mainly to discuss upcoming policy decisions on the open burning of landscape waste in the unincorporated area of the county and potential alternatives to open burning, including the concept of franchising of waste within the unincorporated area, I want to make it clear that these topics don't exist in a vacuum. In fact, there's a long history of county and municipal involvement in both open burning restrictions and waste hauling policy. And I think it will be useful to briefly walk through some of the more significant milestones that from that history before we talk about what may potentially happen next. So to start, Lake County is really no stranger to open burning restrictions. Regulations thus far have centered on a couple of things, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later in the presentation tonight. First, the burning of garbage and construction materials has been the subject of a long-standing ban in the unincorporated area, much like it is in municipal areas as well. And we do routinely investigate examples of property owners burning trash or leftover 2x4s and plywood from construction projects. And those activities are not permitted in the unincorporated area. And that's something that we do ticket for if it becomes clear that someone's doing that kind of activity. Secondly, since 2011, we've imposed open burning restrictions in a very small area of the county in the direct vicinity of Stevenson High School in light of the close proximity of forested residential properties really next to the high school, abutting the high school property, and the impacts that smoke from yard waste burning have been creating for the students and faculty on campus. And so that's a limited geography where we actually have restrictions in place since 2011. But that said, up until this point, the county's not taken up a serious study of creating a county-wide unincorporated set of restrictions on the open burning of landscape waste until now. But when you look at how municipalities in Lake County and other metro counties in the Chicago area are handling the topic of open burning, I'd say that Lake County is more the exception than the rule. The majority of counties and municipalities within our own county either ban or restrict the open burning of landscape waste on a permanent basis. And what that means practically is that from one block to the next, in some cases where you have an unincorporated area sitting adjacent to a municipality, there's a significant difference to how people deal with their leaves and their weeds and their other landscape waste. And on the municipal side of the street, they're usually bagging it or sweeping it to the curb. And on the other side of the street in the unincorporated area, unless they've resorted to an alternative, and we'll talk a little bit about alternatives to burning later, unless they're doing that, they're burning it. Of course, one of the main reasons that the majority of municipalities have either banned or restricted leaf burning is their fairly common practice of establishing franchise agreements with an area waste hauler that would serve municipal residents with both garbage and recycling and in many cases landscape waste pickup. This makes it a lot easier for residents to dispose of their yard waste without burning it. Increasingly, this is also becoming an attractive option among our townships, our townships throughout the county, where at this point, 6 townships, that's a third of our total townships, have entered in recent years into franchise agreements with a waste hauler for these waste services. They see franchising as more cost effective for their residents as it can drive prices down. And it's similar to the competitive rates that municipal residents enjoy for their waste services. So we'll be talking later in tonight's presentation about that concept for the entire unincorporated area outside of those townships that have already franchised. And that brings us forward in time to the most sort of recent foray into regulations. And this is a topic that most of our attendees are probably familiar with by now, and that's the county's temporary restrictions on the open burning of yard waste in unincorporated areas during the COVID pandemic. This is a topic that I'll talk a little bit about in detail a little bit later. I'll talk about the mechanics of that temporary ordinance. But that in a nutshell is a brief history of open burning and waste franchising that helps give you, the audience, a sort of a background into what we're exploring for the future. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this first part of our presentation will cover the topic of open burning regulations, and this slide's the sort of mini agenda for this part of tonight's discussion. You'll see several specific areas that we're going to cover here on the slide, including the temporary open burning ordinance, which I'll discuss next, followed by a brief survey of the question of the benefits and risks of burning, the pros and cons, followed by some discussion about the current ways in which unincorporated residents can avoid burning altogether and still address the accumulating yard waste on their properties during the springtime and fall. And then we'll get into what a lot of the audience is probably eager to learn more about, which is our future policy options on open burning. And we'll follow that with some brief discussion of our previous survey that a lot of you likely filled out already. Alex pointed out that over 1,100 responses have been received, and that's fantastic. We'll be kind of addressing the information that was contained within those responses relating to potential restrictions. So can we go to the next slide, please? So let's first talk about the temporary burning ordinance that we first enacted back in May of 2020. That's when the COVID pandemic was in a period of rapid spread. During the pandemic, based on information that was available from the CDC or the Centers for Disease Control, people with underlying respiratory medical conditions, including chronic lung disease and asthma, and similar conditions were all at higher risk for developing more serious complications if they contracted COVID-19. And the smoke from open burning can really exacerbate these residents' respiratory conditions and further compromise their ability to fend off the potentially serious effects of COVID-19. And additionally, people who do not have underlying conditions can experience more severe COVID conditions or COVID symptoms when they're exposed to smoke from open burning. So in light of these increased risks to the public during the pandemic, and we'd also gotten a lot of complaints from constituents about landscape waste burning in the spring of 2020, the board made a move to enact a temporary ban on a set of restrictions on the open burning of yard waste within the unincorporated areas. We are not alone in this regard. In light of the increased risks during the pandemic, a number of state and local governments throughout the country enacted temporary bans on open burning. Several fire protection districts across Lake County, encompassing a number of unincorporated territories, likewise enacted temporary restrictions on open burning within their boundaries. Our ordinance is temporary, but it's been extended throughout the pandemic on an emergency basis. But now that the pandemic is hopefully on the wane, we're extending the restrictions for one last season until the fall of 2021, when at that point we'll either reevaluate the status of that set of restrictions based on the conditions at that time, or if the board decides to move forward with permanent restrictions for the open burning of landscape waste in the unincorporated area, these new regulations would simply take effect at that time and supersede the temporary ordinance that will expire in October. So let's talk about what these current temporary restrictions include. It's really important to note at the outset that it's the temporary ordinance that's in effect today is not a total ban. It's a set of what we call time, place, and manner restrictions on what a person can burn, when they can burn it, and how they would burn it. And as a lot of you know by now, burning is allowed from sunrise to sunset 3 days a week under this ordinance, and that's Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Outside of those days and times, open burning of yard waste in the unincorporated areas is not permitted unless it falls into one of the exceptions that we list in the ordinance, such as campfires or recreational fires where there's clean burning materials like dry sticks and branches. And then burning on very large lots where the burn pile can be kept at a great distance from neighboring buildings. And finally, we do have an exception for open space maintenance by trained professionals that are subject to state permitting. And this is typically what you see in the forest preserves and park districts and so forth. I'll remind you, you look at the little banner on the right side of the slide here. At no point is it permitted to burn garbage or construction materials and the like in the unincorporated area. So now we're going to transition to a discussion about the pros and the cons of yard waste burning and some of the impacts of burning yard waste in the unincorporated area. And to cover that topic, I'll now introduce Krista Brown, who's our planning and zoning manager for the county. Welcome, Krista. And I guess we'll advance to the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Again, I'm Krista Brown, Planning, Building, and Development. As Eric mentioned, I'm going to be going over the pros and cons to open burning, some alternative methods to deal with leaves instead of burning, the range of policy options that the board will be considering, and a review of some of the responses that we've received from our first public survey. So beginning with the pros and cons, it's helpful to look at the benefits and costs whenever you're considering any issue. For burning landscape waste on residential properties, it is an efficient reasonably easy and fast way to eliminate leaf litter. There is little to no expense to the homeowner when they're burning, and it saves them labor and time, especially when somebody's dealing with a large lot that contains a lot of trees. However, there are some negative impacts to burning that need to be considered as well. Open burning pollutes the air, and it's generally considered to be a nuisance. Additionally, it can aggravate health issues for nearby residents, as Eric mentioned. And it is a potential fire hazard, which can be especially problematic during periods of drought, like the one that we just experienced earlier this spring and summer. And finally, when people burn leaves and landscape waste, it can sometimes lead to the improper disposal of other materials. So the burning of trash and construction debris are strictly prohibited, but that doesn't always prevent those items from getting thrown into the burn pile. So that's an issue to consider as well. So what else can residents do to deal with the leaf litter besides burning? There are several options actually, and most of these are also free of additional costs. So you can mulch leaves and grass clippings right where they are on your lawn. Most mowers these days have mulching capabilities. So putting your mower blade on the lowest setting and running over the leaves once or twice until they're chopped up into smaller pieces is an effective way to help speed the decomposition process. And it also improves the nutrients in the soil, which in turn helps the grass. If you have extra leaves, you can collect some of those mulched leaves in the mower bag and spread them around your garden or landscaped areas or around trees in the same way that people use bark mulch. And doing this practice also helps to improve the soil, it suppresses weeds, and it provides food for insects and bugs and birds. So mulched leaves also can make an excellent addition to your compost pile. Adding leaves to composted material helps create rich organic material that can be recycled right back into your garden and flower beds. For a natural look and to mimic nature, another option is to just simply leave the leaves on the ground, especially when they're under trees or in wooded areas. And finally, another option is to utilize a hauler or other service provider. So several townships, municipalities, and even some individual homeowners associations are already providing landscape waste hauling options for their residents. In some other cases, residents may choose to hire a landscape contractor to help them out with their leaf removal. So depending upon where you live, it may be a case of contacting your existing hauler to see what options are available. County staff are aware that there are some residents in the county who may not have these options. And so we've been exploring some potential solutions to that, and we will discuss that later on. So the county board is going to be looking at and discussing a number of policy options, policy considerations in the upcoming months. And this conversation includes a wide range of different policy options. From taking no action to adopting some balance of time, place, manner restrictions, which I'll explain more about in just a little bit, to potentially opting for a total ban on all open burning. So time, place, manner restrictions could involve several options or different combinations. Possible burning restrictions that are related to time could include, for example, limiting burns to specific days of the week, times of the day, or only at specific times of the year. Some examples of this could be only allowing burning on weekends or every other Saturday or only in certain months during the fall. This is actually part of the temporary restrictions that are currently in place, where burning is limited to specified days of the week. So options that are related to place usually involve restricting burning when in certain proximity to buildings or property lines. For example, burning could be prohibited when it is within a certain distance, say 200 or 500 feet of a habitable structure. And finally, we have factors associated with the manner of burning. So this includes things like requiring an adult to be present at all times to monitor the burn, and to having an available and accessible source of water on hand at all times. So I think it's very helpful to keep in mind that these are just examples of the different types of restrictions that may be under consideration. And we'd like to emphasize that there are no definitive recommendations for time, place, manner restrictions being proposed at this time. We have a ways to go before we get to that point, and a lot of different things to consider. So moving on to some of the responses that we received in our survey, we definitely recognize the importance of engaging with the residents of Lake County and getting your input. A virtual public forum was launched this spring, which allowed residents the opportunity to learn more about the topic, explore what the rules are in other areas, including adjacent counties and municipalities in the county, and completing the survey and providing comments. The questions that were included in the survey asked residents about what current methods are being used to dispose of landscape waste, what their opinions are on open burning and potential restrictions of that activity, and to gauge interest levels in different types of waste hauling services should they be made available in conjunction with restrictions. And to date, as of yesterday, we have received over 1,200 responses to that survey. So that is a great wealth of information there. So the first question that we polled residents on was related to what the different methods are that people are currently using to dispose of their landscape waste from residential properties. So our poll results show that 42% of respondents utilize open burns on their property, which is reflected in the blue in the pie chart. About 10% use some sort of contracted service provided by their township or HOA or other provider. And that those areas are shown in green. 6% compost or mulch their materials, and 26% responded that they use some combination of those options that I just listed. And that section is shown in light blue. The gray area represents 16% of the respondents who indicated that they either have no need for service or didn't respond to this question. So moving on to another question that we included in our first survey, which was related to gauging levels of interest on possible restrictions. So the question was posed, if Lake County adopted restrictions on open burning of landscape waste, what approaches would you prefer? And the possible answers to choose from included, I would not like to see any restrictions on open burning, allow it only on limited days of the week, allow it during limited times of the day, allow it only on larger properties, and larger properties was defined as 5 acres or greater in size, or I would like to see a total ban on open burning. And respondents were able to choose more than one answer. To summarize our initial assessments of the data, we see that less than half, or 47% of the people who responded to this question would not like to see any restrictions on open burning. And 53% of respondents indicated that they would accept either some type of restriction or a total ban. Among the different types of restrictions, the most popular choice was to limit burning to certain days of the week. And now that we've walked through the open burning topic, I just want to remind everyone that's joined us tonight, if you have any questions or comments, please continue to go ahead and put those in the chat. We may be able to get to a few of them tonight, as we mentioned, but I would also like to reiterate that even if we don't specifically get to your question or comment tonight, we will definitely be including all of the comments and questions that we receive, and we'll be providing that to the board, and they'll get a full copy of everything. So with that, I would like to move into the next portion of tonight's agenda, and that will focus on the different waste disposal options that are being considered. We'll cover the request for proposal, or RFP for short, that the county recently issued, and the different options for waste services that were part of the RFP. And we'll also go over some more of our survey results. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ruth Ann Hall, and she's going to talk about the RFP.
Thank you, Krista. As Krista said, I am the purchasing agent for Lake County. So I just wanted to give you a quick synopsis of how we have acquired our information from the proposed vendors. we did actually issue an RFP, which is a request for proposal. That is a procurement tool that we use to be able to solicit responses to services and issues that are facing the county. It allows for the vendors to submit sealed proposals, their responses in response to the specifications that we have included, and provide their response and their solutions. Why this was done is because we know that in the unincorporated areas, there are often many times multiple haulers who are servicing a neighborhood. And the option came forth to potentially franchise this and then be able to consolidate those services for those neighborhoods. And it is an alternative to open burning. We'd be able to provide you competitive pricing through the RFP process. What we're really doing is we're looking for the most qualified vendor to provide the services at the best value. We're able to interview the vendors, we're able to ascertain their qualifications, and we're able to negotiate pricing for the residents. And as I stated, again, franchising hopefully will reduce that traffic on the residential roads. Now, there are some downsides to franchising. I understand now that residents who live in unincorporated areas have that individual choice for haulers. This would require that residents in unincorporated Lake County go with the vendor that Lake County selects. This excludes the unincorporated properties within 6 townships that already have established contracts for collection services. There is the potential that it might increase costs for some customers. Some customers may have negotiated great rates for themselves. We're looking for an overall rate for all residents. And again, we're looking to make sure that we negotiate something that is fair and is competitive within the marketplace for all the residents. And the last thing is simply that as we select one vendor for the unincorporated areas, there may be a change in your disposal pickup schedule. So that might be a challenge for some, but again, it's all meant to reduce that truck traffic on residential roads. I'm going to invite Walter Willis, the Executive Director for SWALCO, to talk about our next slide and what the scope of services really was for the RFP that we put out, as he was one of those experts that we look to help develop that. Walter?
Thank you, Ruth Ann, and good evening, everyone. My name is Walter Willis, the Executive Director of the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County. This is one of the functions that I do quite often for my municipal members, looking at the waste services request for proposals. So that's why my expertise was used on this project. So I'll go over the RFP real quickly. We had 2 different scopes. One, we decided to go ahead and just get proposals or information on the typical municipal type of suite of services that are provided, and that would be your refuse or garbage can, your recycling, and then a landscape waste opt-in. Landscape waste is typically not required or that you pay for in most of the municipal contracts. It's an opt-in, something that you can do with a sticker or a subscription program. Then we also looked at allowing food scraps or food waste to be commingled with your yard waste, which would end up at a compost site instead of a landfill. So that was the scope 1. And then you'll see the map on the right. We cut the county into 4 quadrants and allowed the haulers to provide quotes on each of those different quadrants. And then scope 2 was really landscape waste only. And I've never done a bid like that before, a request for proposal like that before. And so we did it, and we, that's the main concern that we have with, providing some sort of landscape waste service. And also that option 2 or scope 2 had the food scraps option in there as well. So next slide, please. So much like Krista went through, there were quite a bit of responses to this question that was asked about the consolidation or coordination of services so that the county could obtain hopefully a more efficient and cost-effective service for the incorporated areas. And these are the results of that question. 45% of people said, no franchising, leave it alone as is. And then about 55% were split between the garbage and recycling only, or garbage, recycling, and landscape waste. So, and then 2% were for the landscape waste only option. So it's about a 45-55 split on the survey response regarding this idea of providing franchise services in the incorporated areas. So I'm going to turn it back over to Eric, I believe, to continue the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric Wagner again. Now we're gonna get to the portion of the meeting where now that we've kind of given you a lot of information to mull over, want to talk about what's next. What are the next steps in this process? We do want to, at the outset, sort of assure you that this conversation is an ongoing conversation and it's far from over. We intend to make this a very, very thorough discussion with the community and with our board. And this is going to take us through the rest of the summer into really the early fall. After tonight's meeting, we'll be putting together another survey that we'll be releasing in the coming days, hopefully by the end of this week or the early next. And this information, that we're going to be putting into the survey is sort of going a little further than we did with the first survey. We're hoping to get some additional feedback from you based on all the content that we shared with you tonight. A few weeks later, after we've had some opportunity to get, a good volume of survey responses, and we're hoping to actually increase the number of survey respondents beyond the initial survey, which was 1,100. Hope to see even more this time. But once we get to that point, we're going to compile all the information that we've received from the public input at that point. And that includes both surveys and content that we've gotten from the chat tonight from the public. And we're going to package that together with some policy related options for our board members. And we're going to present that information in August at a joint committee meeting of our Public Works, Planning and Transportation Committee and our Energy and Environment Committee of the County Board. And that's on August 4th. And what we're going to do at that meeting is we're going to lay out the options that we've identified for potential future action in the area of open burning restrictions for yard waste and franchising. We're going to generate committee discussion based on these options and based on all of the really important feedback that we've gotten from the public here tonight and from the surveys. And then hopefully get from there consensus from our committee members on a direction forward. If that involves direction to draft a set of permanent restrictions or some kind of waste franchising agreement, then we'll move forward to committee discussion of that draft and action at the September round of committees, and that's September 1st and 8th, followed by county board action at either the September or the October board meeting. At all stages of this process going forward, the public will have an opportunity, and really we're going to encourage you to provide your input both at the meetings themselves, but also by participating in our second round survey and emailing us your feedback. So that said, let's get to some of that feedback now in our Q&A portion of the meeting. And I'll pass it back to Alex for this portion of lead this portion of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, if you could advance to the next slide, I think we have some frequently asked questions. Perfect. So we received a number of questions throughout this process already through the surveys and just through an email address that we'll share in a bit too. And so these are some of the themes that we've gotten so far. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to answer some of these. And we've been getting some of this in the chat too. So we really think this would be a good opportunity to answer. So my first question is, will campfires be banned?
I'll take that question, Alex. So currently, small recreational fires are allowed under the temporary public nuisance ordinance. Those rules state that outdoor fires that are no larger than 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, when used for recreational or ceremonial purposes, those are permitted. And that includes things like campfires and backyard and patio fire pits. So that would be something that would potentially be allowed to be carried forward in the future if there were restrictions placed on open burning. It's one of those considerations.
Okay, next question, is burning garbage banned?
Yes, so I think Eric mentioned that earlier on in our presentation. So it is a public nuisance to ban rubbish, garbage, refuse, or construction debris on any property in all unincorporated areas of the county. And we actually have a code enforcement hotline that people can call if they want to report a complaint, if they are aware of people burning those types of prohibited materials.
Okay, next question. So I know we got a number of this in the chat. So what options are being considered?
So as I mentioned earlier, at the joint committee meeting scheduled next month, board members are going to begin consideration on a number of options. And those range from having no restrictions on the one hand. They could potentially enact some level or combination of restrictions related to the time, place, and manner. And I gave some examples of those, but again, that looks like things such as burning on certain days of the week or month or in certain locations. And then finally, they could possibly consider prohibiting it entirely. So there's a range of options to be considered along that continuum from doing nothing to enacting some level or some type of combination of restrictions or banning it altogether.
Okay, what are the negative impacts of burning landscape waste?
So I'll cover this one, Alex. So we did touch on this a little bit in the presentation, but I'll reiterate that there are a number of not so pleasant outcomes from yard waste burning, and including respiratory and other health risks. And this has especially been a concern during the pandemic. There are other issues as well, though. It's a potential fire hazard if a burn pile is not properly managed. Some folks like to mix and match what they throw into a burn pile. And we've frequently encountered a mix of yard waste and garbage being burned in one fire. And finally, smoke can be a general nuisance if it gets thick enough to impact people, where they live and where they walk around and exercise and congregate outside, etc.
Okay, another one from the chat. Will controlled prescribed burns in the forest preserves be banned?
So I think this is an important question that is it's on a lot of people's minds. They want to make sure that the forest preserves and our other park district or open spaces in the county that have sensitive native areas are able to maintain those areas in their native state. And a good part of doing that is a method that we call the controlled burn or prescribed burn. Prescribed burns are currently exempt from restriction under our temporary burning ordinance. And obviously the county does recognize the important value in maintaining our native open space And we also understand that big open space landowners like the Forest Preserve and our park districts and open space districts, and even some homeowners associations, they've invested in the time and training that is required to learn how to do controlled burns properly and in accordance with state rules. There's a whole body of regulations and standards that apply to how you conduct a controlled burn. And those rules are set up and designed to ensure that the burns themselves are minimizing their impact on area residents and so forth. So as staff, and I'm not going to speak for the board, but we would anticipate continuing to apply these same kinds of exceptions to those specific types of, I'll call it special burning activity, if the board ultimately moves forward with a set of permanent restrictions.
Okay, and then the last one for this slide, will farms be affected?
So I'll again refer to the temporary open burning ordinance, which right now allows burning any day of the week, as long as it's during the daytime and at least 500 feet away from neighboring structures. The county board will have obviously a continuum of options available to it to consider if it decides to move forward with permanent restrictions, and they'll have to decide whether this particular exception will continue in that case.
Okay, I think we have a next slide. All right, waste hauling Q&A. One that I think we got this in our survey. What am I going to do with my Christmas tree?
Yes, I can take that one, Alex. We actually put a specification in the RFP to require that any waste hauler provide that service for free for pickup of your tree, January 2nd through January 25th.
Okay, and then another one, will I have to use the county provider if I'm in a township that provides waste hauling?
No, if you are in one of the 6 townships that are already providing franchised waste hauling services, that's Ela, Lake Villa, Warren, Shields, Fremont, and Avon, that will not be affected by this.
Okay, how has the county determined the best method for finding the most qualified hauler to provide the services at the best value?
Again, that is through the request for proposal process. It allows us to evaluate the vendors, their qualifications, and negotiate a price for the residents.
And looping back to someone in the chat actually just mentioned the Forest Preserve provides disposal for Christmas trees. So yeah, I believe that is the case too. So kudos to James there. And then our last question on the slides, and then I think we're kicking it back to you, Eric, and then I'll read a couple more that I saw in chat, just kind of general themes. But Ruth Ann, the last question here on this slide, can I refuse to pay for landscape waste services under a franchise? For example, compost or mulch on my property for free?
Absolutely. What the primary services are that we're looking for waste hauling is garbage and recycling. The pickup of landscape waste or any composting for food scraps, those would be opt-in kind of subscription-based services. So if you are already mulching your leaves on your property, you do not need to opt in for those services.
All right, perfect. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I guess we do have, additional questions? And so I guess we'll do we have the next steps kind of slide now, or are we just going to take the additional questions now?
Hi, Alex. I think if we have some time to go over some additional questions,
Okay.
Let's do that now before we get to our last slide.
All right, let's do that then. Okay, so a lot of folks in the chat were mentioning that they have large lots with a lot of woods, and how could they address yard waste when they have more branches and other material that would be easy to bag up every week? So I think this would be good for you, Eric. Do you have any thought about how this might be addressed?
So as I mentioned before, the board has a range of options that it can consider going forward with respect to potential restrictions in the future related to the open burning of yard waste. And in the area of the county, in the areas of the county that have a lot of heavily wooded sections, some of those are on large lots, and where it's sometimes practically difficult to maintain that material on a yearly basis, and to bag all of that. I could imagine that it's a ton of work and next to impossible in some cases, depending on the amount of material that's generated from any given property owner's section of woods. But, one example of how the board might handle this, if it were to look at size-based restrictions, similar to the restriction that's in the current temporary burn ordinance, if properties are of a certain size to where a burn pile could be set back at a sufficient distance from neighboring properties to limit the impact of open burning, that might be one of the options that the board considers for these kinds of scenarios in which it's just very challenging to bag up all the wooded material, branches and so forth, and additional leaves that may accumulate on one of these larger properties. I'll also point out that, and that's something that, if you have a time, place, and manner restriction in place, that's something that it still would allow for property owners to do those burns, on a semi-regular basis during the burn season if they were to go through that. Another way that some people could potentially address this, depending on the quality and type of woodlands they have on the properties, they potentially could, depending on the types of materials that they're working with, this could fall within that sort of controlled burn or prescribed burn category. But we'd have to take a closer look at that as we were looking at what the potential burn options would be for that to be considered an exemption. And then finally, there are ways in which people can still make use of their available tools, like if you have the option of chipping some of the wood into mulch or stockpiling it for curing for future use. We do have in our current restrictions an exception to allow for these recreational fires. And so while it's not going to necessarily chip away at larger volumes of wooded material, it will help a bit in dealing with that. So I do think that the board's going to be looking very closely at these situations as it considers its policy options, and taking into account some of the specific challenges that the larger property owners have dealing with, the stuff that's on their own properties.
Okay, thank you. One other question, we received a lot of questions about specific items. When we talk about like landscape waste, what does that include? And maybe can we provide a couple like common examples? And I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but maybe not so much known examples. Like, could you just break that down a little bit?
Sure. So in general, landscape waste, it's considered to be, organic waste that's generated, from plant material outside of the home. It doesn't include, items from commercial or industrial uses. We actually have a definition for landscape waste in our in the public nuisance ordinance, and the way it is defined per that code is that it includes shrubbery cuttings, grass clippings, leaves, and other non-woody materials that are accumulated as a result of a person's residential property. Alex, I'm not sure if we can hear you.
Sorry, I had my microphone on mute. Can you hear me now?
We can.
All right, good. Okay, so I think this one might be for Ruth Ann, but someone asked, will all proposals be made available to the public?
Sorry about that. Yes, they will. But during the RFP process, this is a closed procurement. So we receive the proposals and they are sealed. We do not reveal all of the proposals until the contract is fully awarded. But if you want, you could also follow along with the procurement, and we do present this to the county board and allow for public comment through that process.
Okay, perfect. And I think we'll go into next steps here shortly. I think we got two questions. I can't believe it. I never thought I would actually be able to answer some of the own questions being in communications here. But so someone asked, how do we find out about the next survey and how will we be able to take it? So the great news is by signing up for this Zoom meeting, we now will be able to send you, because the information you provided, we could send you that survey directly through email, so you're aware of it, and we'll be able to take that survey. And we'll also, make sure that you're up to date on just, the latest information and kind of how we move along in this process. So, we'll definitely try to keep you up to date through your email in the coming weeks and throughout the summer. And then I got another question. Will the presentation slides be available online in PDF format for downloading? And actually, this whole meeting is being recorded. So we're hoping to post this online probably in a day or two. We're going to post this online on our website, and everyone is welcome to look back at the meeting and look through the slides and everything like that through the recording. So we're more than happy to make that available. I guess I'll turn it back over. We've gotten, before I turn it back over, I just want to say the amount of input and questions we've gotten through the chat and just through like the survey has been awesome. And this is just kind of, we're just kind of getting started almost, right? And Eric will kind of segue into how to stay involved.
Thank you, Alex. So throughout tonight's meeting, we've been really emphasizing that we want the public to stay involved and engaged throughout this whole process. And we really do mean that. We went to a lot of trouble to develop our first survey, putting this meeting together. We're going to be spending time putting together the second round survey, and then working with the board to make sure that the public input is continuing to be collected throughout the process going forward. Your input's really important to us, and it's also really important to our county board members. So let me kind of wrap the meeting up by reminding you how you can keep in touch with us and stay in the loop about this policy discussion. So if you look at the screen here, you'll see first that you can participate in a round 2 survey. And as I mentioned earlier in the meeting tonight, our goal is to push that out by the end of the week or early next. And by signing up, you'll be getting access to that. The survey will also be located on the virtual public forum homepage that many of you accessed to get to the first round survey and fill that out. We appreciate that. This taking a look at the slide here, the second main way that you can stay in touch with us and to share your feedback is to send us an email at the email listed here on the screen. And we continue to collect those emails as time goes by. And the final way to really stay involved is to continue attending meetings with the county. We're going to have meetings going on throughout the summer into the fall, the next of which is coming in August. So with that, I'd really like to thank all of those who took the time to tune into tonight's meeting. It's, we're cutting into your dinner time, and we appreciate you taking the time out for this. This is an important topic to us, and we know it's an important topic to you. We really appreciate your interest in this important discussion, and And we do look forward to keeping the conversation going with you as we move forward into the next steps. So with that, thank you and good night, everyone.